My mother began living in my house and invited her friend with her children from her ex-husband. They broke the equipment and everyone laughed at me. I left the house, stopped paying rent, and went away. I, 23M, had been living at home with my mom, a situation that started out as practical but quickly became overwhelming. It wasn't the usual arrangement most people might picture, me mooching off her kindness or avoiding adult responsibilities. No, I was the one carrying the load. I paid rent, covered the electricity bill, and even took care of her phone plan. It wasn't glamorous, but I figured it was manageable, at least for a while. Until it wasn't. I'll start with my room. Calling it a bedroom doesn't do justice to how cramped and chaotic it felt. It was more like my whole life shoved into one space. Sure, I slept there, but it was also where I worked. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and my studio was a desk crammed against one wall, piled high with sketchpads, monitors, and cables. The smell of coffee and stress lingered constantly. I worked late nights, often pulling 12-hour shifts on projects, trying to make ends meet. The stress was intense, but freelancing was my dream, so I pushed through. My mom? Well, let's just say she had expectations. She was in her late 40s, unemployed, and spent most of her time at home. To hear her tell it, she was looking for work, but I rarely saw her make an effort. I wasn't blind. I knew she was leaning on me more and more. It started small, with her asking me to help out by covering groceries or fixing something around the house. But those requests snowballed into an unspoken agreement that I would handle almost everything financial. It got worse. My mom wasn't content with the fact that I was paying her bills. She also began to treat the house like it was hers alone. She controlled the thermostat, always cranked way too high, spiking the electric bill, left dishes piled up for me to clean, and generally acted like a roommate from hell. But what really grated on me was her attitude toward my work. I'd be mid-project, trying to meet a tight deadline, and she'd come barging into my room without knocking. "Can you drive me to the store?" she'd ask, ignoring the clearly visible headset on my head or the chaos on my screen. If I said I was busy, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about kids these days or how back in her day, people respected their parents. It made me feel like a teenager, not a grown man paying the rent. One day, things reached a breaking point. It was a Thursday, and I was swamped. I'd taken on 2 back-to-back projects that both needed to be delivered by midnight. I'd barely slept the night before and was running on fumes. Around 3 p.m., my mom strolled into my room holding her phone. She didn't knock. She never knocked. "Hey, my phone's acting weird," she said, shoving it toward me. "Fix it," I sighed, already feeling my patience slipping. "Mom, I'm working," I said, not even looking away from my monitor. She huffed. "It'll only take a second. I can't call Linda, and I need to tell her about the garden club meeting." I turned to her, my irritation bubbling up. "I'm on a deadline. Can it wait?" Apparently, it couldn't. She snapped at me, saying, "You always have time for your computer but never for your family. What kind of son are you?" That hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe she'd said that. "I pay your bills." I shot back. "I'm keeping this house running while you sit around doing nothing. What more do you want from me?" The argument escalated fast. She accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and disrespectful. I countered that she was lazy and took me for granted. By the end of it, we were both yelling, and I felt like a rubber band stretched to its limit. Finally, I told her I couldn't do this anymore. I needed boundaries. Her response? She laughed. Laughed. "Boundaries? In my house? You're funny," she said, walking out like she'd won. I sat there, fuming. I couldn't concentrate on my work anymore, and the deadlines loomed like a guillotine. That night, I didn't sleep. I finished the project somehow, but the exhaustion and frustration lingered. It was clear. Something had to change. The next morning, I decided to confront her again. I told her I was tired of being treated like an ATM and a servant. I explained how much pressure I was under and asked her to contribute more, either financially or by respecting my space and time. But she turned it back on me, saying I was too sensitive and that she was doing her best. She even tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "If your father were still here, he wouldn't stand for this kind of disrespect." That was her trump card. My dad had passed away when I was 15, and she never missed a chance to weaponize his memory. It was like a knife to the gut every time she brought him up. I bit my tongue, but the resentment was boiling over. Then came the straw that broke the camel's back. A week later, while I was out running errands, I got a text from her. "Hope you don't mind. I'm having some friends over for dinner." I didn't think much of it until I got home and found my room, aka my workspace, ransacked. She'd moved my equipment to make room for her guests to sit and eat. My monitor was precariously balanced on my bed. My sketch pads were shoved into a corner, and there were wine glasses on my desk. I lost it. I couldn't believe she disrespected my space like that. When I confronted her, she acted like it was no big deal. "They needed somewhere to sit," she said with a shrug. "You're always in here anyway. What's the problem?" "The problem," I said through gritted teeth, "is that this is my space, my work, my livelihood. You can't just barge in and treat it like it doesn't matter." Her response? She rolled her eyes and muttered something about me being dramatic. That night, I started looking for apartments. After the chaos of our last blowout, I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. Boy, was I wrong. The situation spiraled out of control when my mom decided, in her infinite wisdom, to invite her friend Kelly and Kelly's 2 kids to move in with us. She claimed it was temporary, just until Kelly could get back on her feet after a messy divorce. I didn't even know Kelly that well. She was a longtime friend of my mom's, but had only ever been a peripheral figure in my life. From what little I remembered, she was loud, opinionated, and had a knack for making every conversation about herself. But I didn't think much of it at first. I figured she'd stay for a week or 2, tops. How bad could it be? The first few days were tolerable. Kelly moved into the guest room, and her kids, Tyler, 8, and Mia, 6, slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. They were noisy, sure, but I told myself to be patient. Divorce is messy, and kids don't handle it well. I tried to focus on my work and keep my head down. Then the problem started. Kelly was the kind of person who had an opinion about everything and wasn't shy about sharing it. She'd waltz into the kitchen while I was making coffee and make snide comments like, "Oh, you're one of those freelancers. Must be nice not having a real job." She said it with a laugh, but it didn't feel like a joke. Her kids weren't much better. Tyler was a little terror, always running around the house screaming and knocking things over. One time, he grabbed one of my sketch pads and started doodling in it with a Sharpie. I caught him just in time, but when I told Kelly, she brushed it off. "He's just a kid," she said with a dismissive wave. "He didn't mean any harm." Mia, on the other hand, was eerily quiet. She'd sit in a corner, watching everything with wide eyes, like she was cataloging the world around her. At first, I thought she was just shy, but then I started noticing strange things. My headphones went missing one day, only to turn up in her little pink backpack. When I asked her about it, she just stared at me, not saying a word. It was unnerving. The tipping point came about a week later. My mom called me into the living room for a family meeting. Kelly and the kids were there, too, which was already weird. My mom looked at me with that fake sweet smile she used when she was about to drop a bombshell. "We've been talking," she said, gesturing to Kelly, "and we think it would be better for everyone if the kids had a proper room." I frowned, not liking where this was going. "Okay, so, we're going to move Tyler and Mia into your room," she said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "You can set up your work stuff in the garage. It's got plenty of space." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "You're kidding, right?" But she wasn't kidding. Kelly chimed in, saying it was just for a little while, and that the kids needed stability. My mom backed her up, saying the garage would be a great workspace for me. They acted like they were doing me a favor, like I should be grateful. I exploded. I told them it was ridiculous to expect me to give up my room, the one place I could work and relax, so Kelly's kids could have it. I reminded them that I was paying rent, paying bills, and keeping this house afloat. But my mom just rolled her eyes and said I was being selfish. Kelly had the nerve to say, "It's not like you need that much space. You're just one person." Despite my protests, the decision was made. By the end of the week, my room was unrecognizable. My desk and equipment were shoved into the freezing, cluttered garage, while Tyler and Mia moved in. They wasted no time turning it into their personal playground. There were toys everywhere, crayon marks on the walls, and a constant stream of noise. The garage, meanwhile, was a nightmare. It was cold, damp, and filled with old junk my mom refused to throw away. There was barely enough room for my desk, let alone all my equipment. I tried to make it work, but the environment was killing my productivity. My clients started noticing delays, and I could feel my reputation slipping. And then there were the incidents. Tyler and Mia treated the house like their own personal amusement park, with no regard for anyone else. One day, I came home to find Tyler playing with my tablet. He'd somehow unlocked it and deleted an entire project I'd been working on for weeks. When I confronted Kelly, she just shrugged. "Kids are curious," she said, as if that excused everything. Mia's behavior, on the other hand, got even creepier. She started sneaking into the garage while I was working, just standing there silently and watching me. One time, I turned around and nearly jumped out of my chair when I saw her staring at me from the doorway. When I asked her what she was doing, she just said, "Nothing," and walked away. It gave me chills. Things reached a boiling point one evening when I overheard Kelly and my mom talking in the kitchen. They didn't realize I was home, and their voices carried through the thin walls. Kelly was complaining about me, saying I was a spoiled brat and that I didn't appreciate everything my mom had done for me. My mom agreed, saying I needed to grow up and that having Kelly here was the best thing for everyone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd sacrificed so much to keep this household running, and this was the thanks I got? I felt like a stranger in my own home. The final straw came a few days later. I came home from a rare night out with friends to find the garage door open. Inside, my workstation was trashed. My monitor was shattered, my sketches were torn, and my laptop was missing. I was furious. I confronted my mom and Kelly, demanding to know what happened. Kelly admitted that Tyler had been playing in the garage and might have gotten a little carried away. My mom tried to downplay it, saying, "It's just stuff. You can replace it." I was speechless. Years of work, gone, and they didn't even care. That night, I made a decision. I packed a bag, grabbed what little I could salvage, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. It was time to put myself first. I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize just how bad they'd gotten until I stepped back into what used to be my room. It wasn't my room anymore. It was a jungle gym, daycare, and disaster zone rolled into one. Toys were scattered across the floor, sticky juice stains covered the walls, and a rancid smell hung in the air, like someone had left milk out for days. My desk, my equipment, my entire livelihood, everything I depended on, had been shoved into a dark corner. My expensive drawing tablet, my dual monitors, and even my ergonomic chair were crammed into a heap, with cables tangling around them like vines. My heart dropped. These weren't just things. They were tools I'd saved up for years to buy. They were my career, my identity, and my ticket to financial independence. I stormed out of the room, my fists clenched. "Mom!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "What the hell happened to my stuff?" She appeared in the hallway with Kelly trailing behind her, both of them holding mugs of tea like they were at a casual brunch. My mom didn't look the least bit concerned. "What's the big deal?" she asked, shrugging like I just told her the weather was bad. "We had to make space for the kids." Kelly, of course, jumped in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "They're just kids, you know? They need room to play and feel comfortable." "Comfortable?" I snapped. This was my room. I pay for this house. I pay the bills. And you just took it? Without even asking? Kelly had the audacity to laugh. "Oh, come on. It's not like you're sleeping on the street. You've got the garage. That's plenty of space." Plenty of space? The garage was a cold, damp dungeon filled with junk. Boxes of old clothes, broken furniture, and who knows what else. I tried to make it work as a makeshift office, but it was impossible. My hands would go numb from the cold, and the smell of mildew was unbearable. Not to mention the fact that it felt like a slap in the face every time I walked in there and saw what used to be my sanctuary turned into a storage closet. "Return my room," I said, my voice low and firm. "Move the kids out and put my stuff back where it belongs." Kelly exchanged a glance with my mom, and they both rolled their eyes. My mom crossed her arms. "Don't be selfish," she said. "They're just kids. They need stability right now. You're a grown man. You can handle a little inconvenience." Selfish. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. How could she call me selfish when I was the one keeping this household afloat? I felt a surge of anger and frustration, a cocktail of emotions I'd been bottling up for weeks. "You're seriously calling me selfish?" I said, my voice rising. "I pay for everything in this house. I'm the one who's been sacrificing my time, my money, my mental health, and now my freaking room. And you think I'm selfish?" Kelly sighed dramatically, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Look, we get it, okay? You're stressed. But this isn't about you. It's about the kids. They've been through so much already. Don't you think they deserve a little kindness?" Her tone was so condescending, so dripping with faux concern, that I nearly lost it. "Kindness?" I said, practically spitting the word. "Kindness doesn't mean trampling all over someone else's life. This isn't your house, Kelly. You don't get to make decisions here." That struck a nerve. Kelly's face darkened, and she squared her shoulders like she was ready for a fight. "Maybe not, but at least I'm trying to make a difference. What are you doing, huh? Sitting in your little garage, sulking? Real mature." It felt like I was in a bad reality TV show. My mom and Kelly had somehow twisted the narrative so I was the villain for wanting the bare minimum. Respect, boundaries, and the space I'd earned. They didn't see it that way, though. To them, I was the selfish, entitled son who couldn't spare an inch for poor Kelly and her kids. "I'm done," I said finally, throwing my hands in the air. "Move my stuff back, or I'm out of here." My mom's face hardened. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you're going to act like a child, maybe it's better if you leave." I froze. Did she really just say that? After everything I'd done for her, she was kicking me out? Kelly smirked, clearly pleased with herself. "Maybe a little time away will help you appreciate what you've got," she said. I was too stunned to respond. I turned and walked out of the house, my mind racing. Where was I supposed to go? I didn't have a backup plan, no savings for a sudden move. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay there anymore. Not with them treating me like a stranger in my own home. Over the next few days, I tried to salvage what I could. I rented a storage unit with what little money I had left and started moving my equipment piece by piece. Each trip felt like a small funeral for the life I'd built. My mom barely acknowledged me, and Kelly acted like she owned the place. The final straw came when I found Tyler and Mia digging through my storage boxes. I'd left them in the garage temporarily while I figured out my next move, and those little brats had torn them open like it was Christmas morning. They'd ruined my sketches, scattered my supplies everywhere, and broken a lamp I'd had since college. When I confronted Kelly, she had the nerve to say, "They're just curious. Maybe you shouldn't leave your stuff lying around." "It's not lying around," I shouted. "It's in the garage because you stole my room." That night, I made up my mind. I was done arguing, done trying to reason with people who clearly didn't care. I packed what little I could fit into my car, called a friend who owed me a favor, and left. As I drove away, a mix of anger, sadness, and relief washed over me. I didn't know what the future held, but anything had to be better than staying in that toxic house. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe now, I could finally start over. I knew I couldn't let things stay the way they were. My work, my livelihood, was at risk. Without my equipment set up properly, I couldn't meet deadlines, and my reputation with clients was already slipping. Something had to give. I decided to have one last, serious conversation with my mom, hoping to finally make her understand how important this was. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't go well. I caught her in the kitchen one evening, just after Kelly had left with the kids to visit some park. It was rare to find her alone these days. Kelly was practically glued to her side, and they acted more like teenage best friends than two grown women. My mom was washing dishes, humming to herself, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my tone calm. "Can we talk?" She glanced at me over her shoulder, her expression instantly guarded. "What about?" I took a deep breath. "About the room. About my work. I need you to understand how much this is affecting me. She sighed heavily, turning off the faucet. We've been over this, she said, grabbing a towel to dry her hands. The kids need the space more than you do. They're children, for God's sake. I get that, I said, struggling to keep my frustration in check. But I'm not just using that room for fun. It's my studio. My equipment isn't a hobby. It's how I pay the bills. If I can't work, I can't make money. And if I can't make money, this whole house falls apart. Her face hardened. Don't start with that again, she snapped. You think you're the only one making sacrifices? I've opened my home to a friend in need. That's what decent people do. This isn't just about sacrifices, I said, my voice rising despite myself. This is about respect. You didn't even ask me before kicking me out of my own room. Do you know how humiliating it is to be treated like this in the house I'm paying for? She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. First of all, this is my house, not yours. I don't care how many bills you pay. As long as you're living under my roof, you follow my rules. There it was, the trump card she always pulled out when things didn't go her way. I felt my stomach twist with a mix of anger and despair. How could she still see me as some freeloading teenager when I was practically running the household? Mom, that's not fair, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. I'm trying to build something for myself. Do you even care how much I've sacrificed to make this work? Before she could answer, Kelly walked in, carrying a bag of groceries. She must have overheard part of the conversation, because she immediately jumped in. What's going on here? She asked, setting the bag down on the counter. Nothing, my mom said quickly, but I wasn't about to let her brush me off again. We're talking about the room, I said, turning to Kelly, and how it's unfair that I've been banished to the garage while your kids have taken over everything. Kelly's expression shifted from neutral to defensive in an instant. Excuse me? My kids haven't taken over anything. They're just trying to feel at home in a difficult time. Difficult for them? I shot back. What about me? This isn't even your house, Kelly. You don't get to decide who gets what room. Her face flushed with anger. Maybe if you had a little empathy, you'd understand that this isn't about you. My kids have been through hell because of their father. All they're asking for is a little stability. Is that too much for you to handle? Empathy? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You want to talk about empathy? How about some empathy for the person who's been keeping this house running while you freeload? That did it. Kelly's voice rose to a shrill pitch as she launched into a tirade about how hard her life had been, how I didn't understand what it was like to be a single mom, and how I was being petty and selfish. My mom, of course, jumped to her defense, nodding along like Kelly was some kind of martyr. Enough, my mom finally said, cutting me off mid-sentence. I'm tired of your attitude. This is my house, and I'll decide what's best for everyone living in it. Everyone except me, I muttered. What did you just say? She demanded, her voice dangerously low. I said, everyone except me. I repeated, louder this time, because that's what it feels like. You've made it perfectly clear that I don't matter as long as Kelly and her kids are comfortable. Her face twisted with anger. If you can't handle the way things are, maybe you should think about finding somewhere else to live. Kelly smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Maybe that's the best idea, she said. Give everyone some space. I stared at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously kicking me out of my own house? After everything I've done for you? No one's kicking you out, my mom said, her tone ice cold. But if you can't learn to respect the rules of this house, maybe it's time you moved on. That was the final straw. I turned and stormed out of the kitchen, my hands shaking with rage. I needed to cool off, so I went for a drive, aimlessly circling the neighborhood while my thoughts raced. How had things gotten so bad? How had my mom, my own mother, sided with a woman who wasn't even family over her own son? When I finally returned home, I found my room completely locked. A padlock had been installed on the door. My heart sank as I realized what it meant. I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. A note was taped to the door. For the kids' safety, please use the garage. I couldn't breathe. My own room, my sanctuary, my workspace, was now officially off limits. And for what? So Kelly's kids could have a playroom while my life fell apart? I stormed back to the kitchen, where my mom and Kelly were sipping tea like nothing had happened. You locked me out of my room? I demanded, holding up the note. It's not your room anymore, my mom said calmly, not even looking at me. It's for the kids now. You have the garage. Kelly chimed in, her tone sickeningly smug. You'll adjust. It's not the end of the world. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the note on the table and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I tried to be patient. I tried reasoning, explaining, and even outright pleading with my mom to see things from my perspective. But every conversation ended the same way, with her dismissing my concerns and siding with Kelly. It felt like I was shouting into a void, my words bouncing off the walls and returning to me unheard. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The next day, I decided to try one last time. My plan was simple. Lay everything out clearly and rationally, with no room for excuses or misinterpretation. I would make her understand just how much this situation was hurting me, not just financially, but emotionally. If that didn't work, I'd have no choice but to take more drastic action. I waited until the kids were at school and Kelly had gone to her so-called job hunt. She'd been saying for weeks that she was looking for work, but I hadn't seen her send out a single resume or go on a single interview. Instead, she spent most of her days lounging in the living room, scrolling through her phone, and gossiping with my mom over coffee. When I found my mom in the kitchen, I felt a knot of tension in my chest. She was flipping through a magazine, humming softly to herself. She looked so calm, so unbothered, as if everything in the world was perfectly fine. I envied her ability to live in such blissful ignorance. Mom, I said, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk. For real this time. She glanced up at me, her expression instantly wary. What now? She asked, like I was some petulant teenager complaining about curfew. I ignored the jab and took a seat across from her. This can't keep going the way it's been. I need my room back. I need my equipment set up properly, or I can't work. And if I can't work, I can't pay the bills. She sighed dramatically, setting her magazine down. We've already talked about this, she said. The kids need the space. They're going through a lot right now. So am I countered, my frustration bubbling to the surface. But no one seems to care about that. Mom, this isn't just about comfort or convenience. My entire career is at stake. Do you get that? She didn't even flinch. You're overreacting, she said, waving a hand dismissively. You can work just fine in the garage. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Nothing? Mom, this isn't nothing. My desk is crammed into a freezing garage surrounded by junk. My equipment is damaged. My projects are behind schedule, and I'm losing clients. How is that nothing? Her face hardened, and I could see the walls going up. You're being dramatic, she said flatly. You're a grown man. You should be able to handle a little adversity. That word again. Dramatic. It felt like a slap in the face every time she said it, like my struggles weren't real, like my entire life was just some minor inconvenience to her. I'm serious, Mom, I said, leaning forward. I can't keep living like this. Either the room is returned to me, or I'll have to move out. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Move out? She repeated, her tone somewhere between disbelief and amusement. Where would you even go? I'll figure it out, I said. But I can't stay here if things don't change. She laughed. Actually laughed. Like I just told the world's funniest joke. Oh, please, she said. You're not going anywhere. You don't have the money for it. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. I'll make it work, I said. I've already started looking for places. I'm not bluffing, Mom. She waved me off like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Do whatever you want, she said. But don't come crawling back when you realize how good you have it here. That was it. The last thread of hope I'd been holding on to snapped. I realized in that moment that there was no reasoning with her. She wasn't going to change, and neither was Kelly. As long as they had each other, they'd continue to see me as the outsider, the selfish, ungrateful son who couldn't handle a little inconvenience. I left the kitchen and went straight to my laptop. I spent the next few hours scouring rental listings, contacting landlords, and calculating what little savings I had. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover the first month's rent and a security deposit, but it was something. I'd have to make it work, no matter what. Later that evening, Kelly came home with the kids, and the chaos resumed as usual. Tyler and Mia were running through the house, screaming and laughing, while Kelly and my mom chatted loudly in the living room. It was like I didn't even exist. That night, I overheard them talking about me. I was in the garage, trying to work on a project, but their voices carried through the thin walls. Kelly was complaining, as usual, about how ungrateful I was and how lucky my mom was to have her and the kids around. My mom agreed, saying something about how I needed to grow up and learn some respect. The next day, I made my decision. I found a small studio apartment about 20 minutes away. It wasn't much, a tiny one-room unit with peeling paint and outdated appliances, but it was mine. I signed the lease that afternoon and started packing my things that evening. When my mom saw me loading boxes into my car, she didn't even ask where I was going. She just watched from the porch, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Good luck out there," she said sarcastically as I carried the last box to my car. "Thanks," I said, not looking back. "I'll need it." As I drove away, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I was done being a doormat. The day I moved out felt surreal. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure how my mom and Kelly would react, but I'd made up my mind. I'd found a small room to rent in a shared apartment, just enough space to set up my equipment and start fresh. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my life again. Packing was an emotional roller coaster. My friends Liam and Ethan came over to help, their laughter and banter a much-needed distraction from the tension simmering in the house. As I boxed up my equipment and personal items, memories of what my room used to be flooded back. It was hard not to feel bitter as I looked around at the mess Tyler and Mia had left behind. Crayon marks on the walls, broken shelves, and sticky stains on the carpet. What once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a war zone. "Man, this place has seen better days," Liam joked, carefully wrapping my monitor in bubble wrap. "Tell me about it," I muttered, taping up another box. "Let's just get this over with." My mom watched from the kitchen, her face a mixture of anger and disbelief. She didn't say much at first, just stared at me with crossed arms as if waiting for me to back down. But as the hours dragged on and the boxes piled up near the door, her patience wore thin. "So, you're really doing this?" she finally said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Abandoning your family over a little disagreement?" I paused, taking a deep breath before turning to face her. "Mom, this isn't about abandoning anyone. It's about doing what's best for me. I can't live here anymore. Not like this." She scoffed. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By running away? Running away?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Mom, I've been carrying this house for months, paying the bills, dealing with the chaos, sacrificing my work, and you call that running away?" Kelly, of course, couldn't resist chiming in. She walked in with her ever-present air of smug superiority, shaking her head as if I were some unruly child. "You're being so dramatic," she said. "It's just a room. You're overreacting." I laughed bitterly. "Overreacting? You mean like when your kids destroyed my equipment and you called it curiosity? Or when you locked me out of my own room and told me to suck it up?" "Yeah, sure. I'm the one overreacting." The argument escalated quickly. My mom accused me of betraying the family, saying I was selfish and ungrateful for everything she'd done for me. Kelly backed her up, throwing in more jabs about how I needed to grow up and stop making everything about myself. It felt like 2 against 1, but I'd had enough. Their words couldn't hurt me anymore. "This isn't betrayal," I said firmly. "It's self-respect, and I'm done apologizing for putting myself first." With that, I grabbed the last box and walked out the door, my friends trailing behind me. As I loaded the car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, sadness, and a small flicker of hope. It wasn't easy leaving the only home I'd ever known, but I knew it was the right choice. The first night in my new place was quiet. Too quiet. The room was small, with just enough space for a bed, a desk, and a few shelves. The walls were bare, the carpet was worn, and the heater rattled when it turned on. But it was mine, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, I got to work setting up my studio. Liam and Ethan helped me unpack, and by the end of the day, my equipment was up and running. It felt like a fresh start, a clean slate where I could finally focus on what mattered, my work. For the first time in months, I felt productive. The garage had been a nightmare to work in, but here, I had a quiet, organized space where I could think clearly. My clients were thrilled to see me back on track, and I started picking up new projects almost immediately. It wasn't easy, money was tight, and I had to be careful with every dollar, but I was making it work. Then came the social media drama. My mom took to Facebook like a scorned teenager, posting vague but pointed statuses about ungrateful children and family betrayal. She didn't name me outright, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Friends and relatives started reaching out, asking what had happened, and I had to decide how to respond. I chose not to. Engaging would only add fuel to the fire, and I was done playing her games. Instead, I focused on my work, my friends, and building a life that made me happy. It wasn't easy ignoring the noise, but every day that passed without drama felt like a victory.